Hello, and welcome to Horror Movies and Shit. I'm your host, Jim, and with me as always is...
Mark.
Mark, why don't you tell us why you gathered us all here today?
We have a very special guest, all the way from the future. We have Mike from Chinstroker Vs Punter. Mike, how is Sunday?
The future is incredible. There are no hover cars yet, I'm afraid. It's 11:04 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, the 19th of February, 2023. So yes, greetings from New Zealand, aka the future.
This is fantastic.
So, Mike, I was thinking about this, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. I was thinking, I've been listening to your podcast for probably 10 years plus. And then it got me thinking, have I ever listened to or watched anything more? Probably not. Because, it's an hour episode, maybe longer, every week for most of the weeks for 10 years, right?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually been, we're coming up on 15 years of recording.
Cow, wow.
Which is crazy because, we've basically been podcasting now long enough to get cancelled for stuff that we said in our early episodes.
Oh!
So what we've done is we've slowly started only having episodes in the last few years, because I've gone back and sometimes I'll listen. And first of all, I sound like I'm about 12. And second of all, some of that stuff I'm coming out with, I'm like, well, okay, you could not get away with that now. So yeah, we've basically been podcasting long enough for there to be several seismic cultural shifts.
Wow.
Well, that's a good thing, Mike. We are very family friendly here on Horror Movies and Shit.
What?
Clearly.
I'm glad you've cleaned up your act.
Yeah. Okay. I'll come correct.
Yeah. So, no, don't do that, because then that means I have to behave appropriately, and I'm not doing that shit today.
Oh, that's okay. There's no paper trail from me to this at the moment. So, okay, yeah, gloves are off.
That's right.
So it must be probably 13 years. So thinking back, I'm like, I think every other podcast that I'd listened to that's when I first kind of got into listening to podcasts. They've all pod faded. So Mike, what's your secret?
I think doing it for the right reasons, to be honest. I think the only other podcast that's still around, that was around when we started, I think there's a couple. I think Outside the Cinema. I think Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema, that they're still going. But I think really ego is part of it, I guess. When you start recording a podcast, just the very fact that you're recording your voice and putting it out there suggests that you feel that there's some, as ridiculous as it sounds to say, some level of importance in what you're saying. Nobody likes to admit that, but I think that's part of it. But I don't think ego alone. I think, the desire for attention and all that, it's not enough. And I think a big part of it for me is the genuine friendship that I've got with Paul, who I do the podcast with. And when I moved to New Zealand, that meant that we still had our equivalent of our poker night. We still had that kind of reason to catch up. So I think the main motivator is the fact that we both enjoy talking about geeky shit with each other. And that's the reason we've been doing the podcast. Whereas I think if it had been motivated by, as I say, purely by ego or by listeners, it would have gone up and down. Because when we started podcasting, there weren't very many podcasts. So if you did a show, you were guaranteed a large audience. Right. Everybody that we knew when we started podcasting had listeners, multiple thousands of listeners, easily. Even the really shitty podcasts had multiple thousands of podcasts. But then it became much more crowded and, listenerships drop. We've been lucky that we've managed to maintain a certain audience. But if that kind of sense of ego stroking had been the main motivator, we'd have stopped years ago. And I think that's the thing. I think it's doing it for the right reasons and genuinely enjoying the company of the people you work with.
Well, we can't say the same on this podcast because I can't stand Jim. So Jim will just start this podcast to make money, just millions and millions of dollars.
Oh, you're in the right business then.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. I know you're in your mansion right now through all this.
It's more of a lair than a mansion.
Well, I was going to say he was able to move into the future, so.
Well, that's
right.
I don't imagine that was cheap.
No, it was not cheap, and I had to come all the way to New Zealand as well because they've got that, that extra technology, and also they've got volcanoes here as well.
Wow!
And you've what kind of lair would it be if it didn't at least have some kind of proximity to volcanoes?
Well, and if rumor is correct, there are no native snakes in New Zealand, which is another bonus for me.
That's right. Yeah, we don't have all of the kind of murderous arachnids that are scattered around Australia as well. So we got that going for us.
That's fantastic. Except I did once read a book about mutants in New Zealand, and that kind of put me off a little bit, if I'm being honest.
What? I don't know. That kind of sounds like a plus to me. I'm going to be Googling Kiwi mutants after this call.
Oh, don't worry. I'll give you all the information.
Appreciate it.
And basically, I wanted to start this podcast because my wife got sick of me talking about movies to her.
I get that. I started a podcast with my wife recently, though, so it's the family that podcast together and all that.
Oh yeah,
you get your kids involved soon, right?
Oh God, no. Although my daughter's discovered YouTube, doing YouTube videos as well. So she's actually got her own YouTube channel now, and her last video quadrupled the numbers that my last video had, and she's 8.
Oh my!
It's not an unboxing video.
No, and we've got. I mean, I feel like I should contextualize my parenting a little bit here. She's not allowed to be in any of the videos,
Right.
so we're not we're not farming her out or anything just to get better numbers. It's
Right.
not. This isn't like the new media equivalent of getting your kid to become like a chimney sweep or something. But she does videos of with her Barbie videos, and it's with her Barbies, and it's kind of like I'd like to say it's Harryhausen-esque, but maybe not quite that level of sophistication at this point. But yeah, I mean, she put out a video the other day. She's only been doing this for a few weeks. It got 3,000 views in a day.
Wow!
And I'm just researching and editing and trying to secure interviews. And I'm just I'm going about this all completely the wrong way.
You need to do it with Barbies, apparently.
Yeah, I need to do some kind of psychodrama with action figures, perhaps. Or yeah,
There you go.
Although I toyed with doing an unboxing a while ago, and I just thought, what has it come to? That's when you know that you're doing things for the wrong reason. I always think about that Bill Hicks quote about how it makes jerking off look like a spiritual quest. That's kind of that's what doing that. But I just thought, so it's come to this. You are considering doing an unboxing video, and I've just recorded a video before doing this, and I was just doing the artwork for it. And those YouTube videos where it's got photographs of the people kind of laughing and smiling maniacally in front of whatever it is they're talking about. I found myself doing one of those, and I just thought, no, and I just stopped, walked away from Adobe, had a shower, got it out of my system, and
You felt dirty, did you?
Just
yeah,
leave
it was.
Just leave it for the kids to do. That's it's their generation now. We have to.
That's right.
So, also on your podcast, Mike, you've done a great job interviewing a ton of different celebrities. I know, Patricia Tallman, etc. Do you just get in touch with them through social media, or how does that work?
It varies, really. I mean, what I did initially was the classic 30-day free trial on IMDb Pro. It's always a good one. So you do that, and then when you click on somebody, you can get their agent details. But to be honest with you, that kind of thing, it snowballs, because what happens is if you interview somebody and you're relatively respectful and dare I say it, prepared, then they will say, hey, who else you should speak to? You should speak to this person, and they put you in touch with somebody. So you can have this kind of domino effect a little bit. So it's a little from column A, a little from column B, really. Sometimes, and also. You got to shoot your shot on social media. Sometimes the only problem there is it does feel a little bit like begging in public, and getting shot down in public is not a great one. But to be honest with you, it does. There is a bit of a snowball effect to it. If you get somebody and you've maybe ask them questions that they're not used to being asked, or approach it differently, or kind of
good time.
Well, yeah. I mean, stroke their ego again. Then often what will happen is they'll say, "Hey, you should speak to this person." And once you've got a few in the bag, it's always easy to get some because you can point to other examples and go, "Hey, we spoke to this person, so we're not just a bunch of jokers."
So in other words, Mark, that's never going to happen because you just like to talk.
Right. And people don't like to listen, so.
That's right.
Jim, do you have any general podcasting questions for Mike? Or
Well, my biggest question, Mike, is when you got started, how long did it take you to realize that you had built an audience and that this was something you were going to continue to do?
It's a little bit like it's like being in a band.
Right.
I used to, like probably everybody who's a geek played music at some point or another, and I think it's that first time that you do a gig and there's people in the audience who aren't your friends,
Right.
I think that was kind of how it felt. I mean, like I say, it was the fruit hung lower back in 2007 or 2008 or whenever it was that we started.
Right.
And, and I think that it's always been about the sort of quality of the engagement, not the quantity of it. So we've had periods of time where we've had really big audience, but not necessarily that much feedback. And we've had other times where, like the Rewatch Project, this podcast that I do with my wife, we've started that now in this new climate where you have to kind of claw for every listener.
Right.
So what we would do is I remember really clearly when we started Chinstroker Vs Punter, we were on a free platform called Podomatic. I don't think it even exists anymore. And, I remember getting 70 listeners. I remember 70 seeming like this huge number. I remember thinking, wow, we've got 70 listeners. And then I just remember getting our first bit of feedback. And both Paul and I thought it was the other person pretending to be somebody. Because neither of us would believe that there was somebody out there in America. Sam, one of our listeners, still a listener now, sent us an email. And that was such a big deal because at that point we hadn't had any feedback at all. It felt like we were just putting a message in a bottle and throwing it out the window. And we'd had interaction from friends who listened, but that always feels like a bit of a pity party. Kind of my mum thinks I'm handsome. You kind of have that kind of vibe to it. But then when we got that feedback, that was really big. And then it just really took off. I remember every day, there was a period of about a month where, maybe not every day, but every week, we were kind of doubling our listeners, and it just grew and grew and grew and grew. So they sort of plateaued out a little bit. But yeah, it was when we were getting feedback. And I think that feedback is a really big thing because that's legitimizing and makes you feel less like you kind of sat in your parents' basement. So yeah, it was when we were getting the feedback as well. And also I just think when we were interacting with other podcasts as well, that was a big part of it. There were a lot more podcast networks back then. And that's something that we've tried to resuscitate a few times, but it's really difficult. So I think being part of that community and just hearing from people who we didn't know, who we knew. I remember one instance, though, that really freaked me out was getting recognised. I remember I was at a film festival and somebody just walked up to me and went, "Are you Mike from Chinstroker Vs Punter?" And I was like, yeah. And this was in a different city. And they were like, "Oh, I thought I recognised your voice." And that blew my mind. That was a weird one. But feedback, that's the big thing.
And Mark did tell me that he got some advice from you when we first started recording. So I wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh, happy to help. And, I'm looking forward to listening to the show. And like I say, community is a big thing. And, we're looking forward to, having you guys in on that.
Agreed. This has been a lot of fun. Unfortunately, Mark and I were at a horror movie convention, and we were doing a little trivia thing, and we had somebody else in the room with us that just said, you guys need to record this.
Yes.
That's how all this started.
If you're having those conversations anyway, that's a really good sign. If you're having to contrive things, then knock it on the head. But if you're having those conversations anyway, then hell, you may as well record them.
Yeah, why not? Let everybody suffer the way I do. Right, Mark?
You're welcome, Jim.
So Mark has decided that I don't like movies because I'm harder on rating them than he is. So I have to just bring him down to reality because he'll hate a movie and still give it a 6 out of 10. And
give me an example. Give me an example of a time that you do, of a film that you two have graded differently. I feel like I need some kind of calibration here.
So we both appreciate Event Horizon. We'll talk about that one, Mark, because we both love that movie. We both thought it was great. However, on rewatching it, I give it a 5 out of 10 because it did not hold up. Do I still love the movie? Yes. But am I going to give it a high score when I rate it? No.
You see, Mike, see what I have to deal with? And he gives it a 5 out of 10. Come on, man.
I am a really generous reviewer, and I think part of this, I think it's an age thing, because as I get older, like I'm more like, well, They tried really hard, bless them. I'm sure they're lovely people.
It just got worse the older he gets.
I am. As I continue to get older, I get harder and harder on movies than I used to be.
And we're all around the same age anyway. We're all farts.
Yeah. So,
Mike, I asked you to do a little bit of homework, just to start off a conversation about horror, which is what our podcast is all about. And I asked you to come up with your top 5 favorite horror movies and your top 5 most fun horror movies.
Yes.
Obviously not mutually exclusive.
Right.
So I just figured, and I'll be interested to see, I've done the same and Jim's done the same, to see how much cross-pollination we have as far as, it's on my list too. But Mike, for the guest, you can do it from 5 to 1 or 1 to 5, and you can start on your top 5 fun or top 5 overall.
Oh well, should we start on our number 5s for overall?
Okay.
Yeah, and it's
we'll do it one at a time then, maybe, right? So we'll both or we'll all say our number 5, and then we'll go into the number 4. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sure thing. I mean, it's funny. I mean, when I guess we can probably talk a little bit about kind of how one approaches this, because the thing about horror is, and I used to, like probably a lot of your listeners, I used to work at a video library. That was one of the first jobs I ever had. Was I worked for this really nice kind of mom and pop video store that, of course, got bought out by Blockbuster. So, I get a bit aggrieved with all this Blockbuster nostalgia that comes in, because I went from being able to watch movies all day and, I'll be honest, steal food, to being surrounded by moulded plastic fixtures with only allowed to watch the same 5 movie trailers on a loop and all that kind of stuff. But what I always used to say back then was that I would never recommend horrors or comedies, because I think there's such subjectivity to what makes us laugh and such subjectivity to what makes us scared, that it really is, what one man's shit is another man's treasure, And I think that the only other genre that I can think of that's probably as personal is pornography. As ridiculous as that sounds,
that's not untrue, though.
Well, yeah, as far as what floats your boat, and I think the thing with horror is so much of it is connected to childhood. Not so much in the case of pornography, I would hope. But I think it's pretty strong genre division there. But I think that with horror, so much of it is, there's a nostalgia element, which is why I was glad, Mark, that you suggested the favourites as well. But also there's the element of, our fears often are rooted in our childhood as well. So I think that a lot of my list is, I'm not so much into, I guess, I don't want to say current horror, but I think, this elevated horror that we hear a lot about, Hereditary and those kind of movies. I've got no problem with those films, but to me, they don't necessarily exist within my horror fandom. My horror fandom is very much connected to nostalgia, either because the films themselves are older, or because they connect with childhood fear. So my number 5, this is a very long-winded way of saying, my number 5 is a very controversial choice, because I know that a lot of people really don't like this film, and this film doesn't work for them at all. But I think that this is one of the most effective pieces of pure cinema ever made, and an incredible piece of high art, and that is the Blair Witch Project.
Oh,
right?
Sorry.
And I get it. I completely get it, and this is why I had that caveat of the disclaimer. But to me, I saw this film under the perfect circumstances. I saw it pre-hype. I didn't know what it was. I saw it at a film festival, and for me, horror is so much about the implied. And there's a purity to this film that speaks to me. And I think it speaks to the blank spaces in my imagination, because so much of Blair Witch is about what you don't see, and is about the implied, and is about sound design, and is about I know it wasn't the first found footage film, but the way that it uses that material. Of course, all of the things that were surrounding the film as well. And I, in my adult life, haven't been as unnerved by a film as I was when I went home. And I'm, in the words of Henry Winkler in Scream, I'm a desensitized little shit, I was, not so much now I've got kids, because I think that tempers you a little bit, but I was that guy that people are like, oh, have you seen have you seen Serbian film? And I'll be like, oh, I can watch that, no problem. I see that as a challenge. But Blair Witch Project unnerved me, and so much of it is down to there is something out there and we don't know what it is, and it's up to your imagination at 4 o'clock in the morning after you've seen this film to do it. And for me, on that pure level, that's why it's there, but I completely understand, and please do feel free to tell me why I'm wrong.
Oh, I'm not going to tell you why you're wrong. I completely understand your point of view. My issue with the film is I was completely sucked in by all the hype, and then when I got home after the film and I saw all of the stars of the film that are supposedly missing, I was like, God damn it, they suckered me in. I 100% believed, like, I thought it was amazing in the theaters when I thought this was all real. It was amazing. But then I realized, I got suckered in. So from a marketing perspective, it's perfect. It was the perfect movie. It was the perfect storm. It was done really, really well. But because it made me feel duped, I do not like that movie.
I also think, and this is something that people never talk about with Blair Witch Project, I think this filmmaking in Blair Witch Project, people think, it was so easy. They just gave a bunch of kids some cameras and they went out and they cried and filmed themselves. We have seen people try to do this since. And I don't count things like Paranormal Activity, or certainly don't count things like Cloverfield, but we've seen it attempted. And this is something that's been there since day one in the history of horror. We've seen people try to emulate Romero. We saw people throughout the entire 70s and early 80s trying to emulate Tobe Hooper. But at the same time, this is one of those ones where I get it. I completely understand. And I think that this film is also an interesting discussion point because it's right at the center of this conversation around the subjectivity of horror as well. But yeah, I think if I look at horror, one of the responsibilities of the genre of horror is to provide a visceral experience. For me, Blair Witch Project just delivered the hell out of that.
So I totally agree. I can see why people absolutely hate this. It's just like 3 annoying people running around the woods yelling.
Oh, they're the worst, and they're so dumb.
Yeah.
You kick the map into the... Why did you do that? But I love this movie, and whenever you talk about filmmaking, I also want to talk about the sound design a little bit, because I think that is one of the most effective parts of the movie.
Oh, it's horrifying.
Yeah, like you can just hear the screams out out in the woods, and they're like, "Who is that? Is that Josh?" And it really ratchets up the tension all the way through. Also, whenever you talk about like time and place, obviously there's a lot to do with the marketing, but also the kind of the birth of the internet, right? This was one of the first ones where, people started reading about it on the internet, and they posted, the fake articles, and it was a marketing juggernaut.
Yep.
I love it. So I am on board with that. Jim, you're not. But Jim,
I'm used to Mark telling me I'm wrong, so that's okay.
So Jim, what is your fifth?
Hold on one second. Let me bring up my list. Number 5, I put Mark's favorite movie, the Tobe Hooper classic, Poltergeist. And 100% of the reason that this is even on my list is nostalgia. It was my mother and I, as Mark will tell you and anybody who's listened to the podcast, one of our things to do to spend time together was to watch horror movies together when I was a kid. And this was one of those movies we sat down, and from the special effects to the acting, the family dynamic in this film, it's so perfectly cast, and the chemistry on screen is so amazing, and that I instantly fell in love. And this is an example, though, of a movie, too, for me, that holds up. I still, to this day, can watch it and get the same feeling every single time I watch it.
There's a magic in Poltergeist. It's hard to define. And I think that... And I don't want to obviously get into the Hooper Spielberg thing, but regardless of where you sit with that, there is that kind of the environment of the film is very Spielbergian, of course, and I think there's something special about, and we see this in Stranger Things, we see this in Super 8. There's something about early 1980s suburban, modern housing, suburban environments in the States. That is it just has a magical quality to it that's really hard to define, and it's really present in Poltergeist.
It's like a throwback to the 50s Norman Rockwell type thing.
It is. It's very comforting. There's something extremely comforting about it.
The kids are all out on their bikes, and nowadays it's like you have to lock your kids up in case somebody takes them. So.
Right. I think it reminds people of their childhood. I think Poltergeist and E.T. They do that, not just because they're films from their childhood, but I think it's you can almost smell your childhood when you watch Poltergeist.
Mm-hmm. You can, but I think for me anyway, a lot of that has to do with the on-screen chemistry. Like you really feel you're watching a familial unit go through this together, and they're legitimately fighting for each other. And I think it's that sense of security that makes you get so invested in this film so quickly.
Absolutely,
okay.
And I don't think that would be the case if it was made now as well. I think there'd be a lot of manufactured drama between the family members.
Well, they remade it.
And that's what I'm saying. The remake is completely forgettable.
Wow, I had actually completely forgot that existed. Was that Sam Rockwell? Was that?
I believe so. Yes.
That's the one that starts off with him losing his job. They've got this huge house, and he decides to go out and buy everybody a bunch of gifts.
Yep.
Oh yeah, that was when every horror film had the recession as the subtext for about a year and a half, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. It was.
It was pretty bad. So for my number 5, I think is the quintessential 80s horror. And whenever we're talking about our childhoods, I mean, I think we're lucky growing up in the 80s with VHS, with just accessibility. Like kids of the 70s or 60s, they had to watch something at the movies, and then they would have to wait for it to come on TV 10 years later. And, but in the 80s, we could just consume and consume and consume. I remember renting a movie, and you might watch it a couple of times before you gave it back the next day.
Yep.
So I think we're very lucky. So I mean, whenever I look at the 80s in horror, I think of 3 sort of things: fast-paced, comedy, low budget. And I think Evil Dead 2 is probably the perfect 80s horror movie.
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
I'm glad you all agree with me.
Can you remember? I'm curious, Mark. Can you remember when you first watched it? Can you remember where you were and all that? Because for me, Evil Dead 2, not on my list. I'm going to say that now, but I can remember where I was, who I was with, where in the room I was sitting. All of those details made such an impression.
The funny thing about the 80s and kind of my age there, I watched a lot of sequels before I watched the originals, and I believe Evil Dead, the first one, was on the Video Nasties list, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I remember being at school, and people were talking about the first one. They were like, "Oh, this woman gets raped by a tree and all this sort of stuff." I'm like, "Wow, that's kind of crazy." But I saw the second one before I saw the first one. And yeah, I mean, there's certain movies where there is a time and a place, like American Werewolf in London. I remember exactly where I was, when I watched it and what came on the radio after it. Enough. And where I lived in Northern Ireland, I lived very close to a woods, and I was definitely too young to watch it. I don't know what my parents were thinking of. They took me down to the video shop, and I'm like, "Hey, can I see this one?" And it kind of scarred me for a while. So it's one of those movies. It's kind of a landmark for me, even though it's not in my top 5. But just looking back, and the 80s was such a glorious time.
It was
glorious time. So, Mike, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is a film that I don't think I actually saw this until criminally late. I think I was probably in my early 30s when I saw this. So probably good 10, 15 years ago at least. And it was always one of those ones. You mentioned video. I think a big part of video, of course, was the cover art. This sort of the walls of dreams and nightmares that we would see when we go into video libraries. And this is one that I was very familiar with. And for some bizarre reason, I'd never seen it. So there's no nostalgia. I say this with absolute clarity of mind. And I think, I'm doing these in order, but to be honest, I think any one of these 4 that are coming up could be my favourite. And I say favourite not because I don't believe these are the greatest films. I don't think anybody can say that. But for me, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead has to be on one of these lists. It's just such an incredible film, and it delivers. And I know that the conversations about its metaphorical, underpinnings have become a little tired. And you look at it now, and it's pretty simplistic in what it's saying about us and about our kind of rituals of in modern capitalist world. But this film just delivers on every level that a horror and a cult movie should. You've got a really likable cast of interesting faces. You've got Ken Foray just being an absolute badass. He's got his own theme tune in this film, for Christ's sake. And just the people talk, when they talk about this film, of course, about Tom Savini's gore. They talk about all the subtextual stuff. But for me, there's just something about the idea, it's going to sound ridiculous, of living in a mall that's kind of awesome.
Right.
And I think one of the great pleasures of this film is there's about a half-hour period in the middle of the film where kind of nothing happens, where you just sort of live with these characters. And, obviously they're living this incredibly ironic existence where they're in the apocalypse and everything's terrible, but they've got all of the guns and jewelry and booze and food, and they're living this kind of like fake life of opulence. And it's just really enjoyable watching them do that for a huge period of the film. And I think that that's one element of the film that really works. And also, spoiler alert for Dawn of the Dead, I like the fact that this one kind of doesn't have a nihilistic ending. I mean, it originally did, and they changed the ending to give Ken Foray's character kind of a heroic moment. And because of the fact that there is so much nihilism in George Romero, and a lot of other filmmakers of the era, Carpenter as well, liked his nihilistic endings, the fact that this film is kind of given a happy ending really makes it unique. But yeah, Dawn of the Dead just excels in every department and is just a rewatchable, weirdly enjoyable film and kind of a classic for a reason.
Jim, thoughts on Dawn of the Dead?
Mark, shut up.
Jim has not seen the
I have not seen it.
Hey, no shame. Christ, I'd never seen the Akira Kurosawa film until about a year ago, so it's one of those kind of, we've all got those gaps. But look at you. You've got Dawn of the Dead ahead of you.
There's a lot of shame, and Mark brings this up every time we discuss this movie or the trilogy. He shames me every single time. But anyway, Mark, your thoughts?
I mean, you mentioned the trilogy. For me, it's clearly the best of the trilogy. I mean, Night of the Living Dead, of course, massively influential film and essentially created a genre. But I think pound for pound, Dawn of the Dead it's the greatest. Sorry, Mark.
And I will say, actually, Mike, I disagree with you. I still think Dawn of the Dead is a classic. It is my least favorite of the first three. I think it's just a little too long for me. And I get what you're saying about kind of, the fantasy, and especially like whenever I watched this and I was, younger, the idea of living in a mall or just having that access and there's nobody there to tell you to no or stop, and you can just go get whatever you want, right? It's this wonderful kind of dream while the apocalypse is happening. But my favorite actually flips from night and day for different reasons. I mean, night really is the first. You could arguably say the most important zombie movie of all time.
I think there's definitely a case for that, yeah.
And I love the nihilistic ending in Night. I think, when I remember first watching this, and it's so quick, right? It's not like you have, your protagonist, and he's been through a lot, but then at the end, there's some big drama, and no, he's just in the house. They just see him, shoot him, and his body gets thrown.
and it feels like a real assault. But what you say about the length of the film for Dawn, I think that's for me kind of its strength, because it's the only one of the three films that's allowed to breathe. And I think that the fact that it does that you essentially live with the characters almost literally, means that when you have that moment when the biker gang come and take over, and they're like, "This is ours," you're like, "Yes, it is." You almost like want to defend it with them. And I think that is such a powerful moment that only works because of the amount of time that you've spent with them. But I think all three of these films are great, and they're all different. in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And actually, if you think about it, the one with the happiest ending is Day, which is weird because it's the darkest.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of there's a lot of Shawshank Before the Redemption, isn't there, with Day?
Yeah. I mean, they're at the end in the place that they want to be. They're on an island fishing. They got out of it because they were underground for so long, and they got out of it. But I mean, I think Romero's definitely a legend of horror cinema, and that, like, I will not say, oh, you're crazy. Why do you think Dawn is the best? Because for a lot of people, Dawn is head and shoulders above the other two. But I think they're all classics. So, Jim, you have to get on watching.
I'll do my best. I'll get right on my homework.
Okay, Jim.
Oh, so we're on number 4, right?
Right.
My number 4 is going to be Friday the 13th.
The remake, right?
Yeah, no.
Wow, I actually bought into that for a second there, Mark. I spat my coffee out.
No, that's the remake was straight garbage. But that's beside the point. So again, as with a lot of my choices for my favorite horror movies, a lot of it is nostalgia. And I remember first seeing this movie with my stepbrother, and I was probably somewhere between 8 and 10, if I'm remembering right. And it was the sex, the drugs, and everything about this movie, I think, caused me a lot of issues growing up. But it's still, to this day, I remember just being... It was my first introduction to a slasher, and I was just... It was exhilarating. Like, it was fun for me, and a lot of that probably had to do with the fact that I was watching it with my siblings, and they were teasing me every time I jumped and I got scared and all that crap. But it just... It was done so well, and it probably screwed me up a lot with my ideas about sex and drugs, if I'm being honest.
Well, that sort of perception of what it is to be a teenager is such, particularly for us who watch these films younger than we should have, is really can't be understated as far as how important an element of the slasher movies that is.
Yeah.
I mean, because in some ways, the slasher movies were, to me, what I think like John Hughes movies were for a lot of other people.
Probably.
Like a lot of, particularly the sequels, a lot of the Friday the 13th sequels, a lot of those films, they were the films where I would watch them and think, wow, okay, gosh, this is what being a teenager's like. And they introduced me to rock music and all of these things. Right. It's a really big part of that genre.
Yeah, I really thought I'd be spending a lot more time in the woods in a cabin.
you know what's interesting? Yeah. You hear a lot about, the slasher craze of the 80s, and, it's always the promiscuous kids, getting killed as very Reagan-esque, Christian values and all this. I'm like, I think you're overthinking it a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
I think they just wanted to get, nudity in there, and that's the easiest way to do it, and blood. And that got a lot of people interested. So, the reasons around it, I don't know.
I don't think there was no moral agenda to these films. I think what often happens is that these things start off just as kind of market driven things, like you say, the fact that they want a little bit of skin in these films.
I 100%
and then I think people
that.
Start talking about them, and there's a lot of retroactive. Oh yes, this was subtextually about this, and then it becomes part of the genre.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And leading on from that, I've been watching In Search of Darkness 3. Mike, I don't know if you've been watching those 80s Shudder.
Yes, I've seen the first two. Haven't watched the third one yet, though.
Right, I'm about halfway through, but it just reminds me, they had the director of Extra on there. And he's talking about, all these people and critics are saying, this is a movie about abandonment. And he's like, I didn't know what the fuck was going on. But if you want to fit that in, that's great. That makes it feel, makes it much better and more interesting. So, a lot of people can overthink sort of, reasonings and everything else. But anyway, Friday the 13th, I think it's all right. It's not one that I go back and rewatch very often. My favorites Friday the 13th are more of the oddball ones, like Part 7, I believe. Mm-hmm. That's with the psychic girl.
Oh, past 7. You
7
that tells me
great.
everything I need to know about you, Mark.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
It's both, bro. It's both.
Yeah. I mean, I will say
I'm a big slasher fan, so
you say that, but then every time we bring up your favorite movies, there's a lot of slashers on it.
no.
he likes to give the impression that he's not a big slasher fan. He really does. But
I think it's a percentage thing. There's so many out there, and so many are shit. That you're going to have a good number that are really good.
I keep hunting though. I love the classic cabin slasher movie, and I still every so often one from 1982 will pop up on Tubi, and I'll be like, right, I'll go and have a look. And I'll be honest, I think most of the ones that are worth watching, I'd know about them by now. You know,
Right.
So there's a lot of I'm finding a lot of turds in the grass at this point, but it's just you're right. There's just so many of them. But, there's a lot of great ones. There are a lot of great ones.
So my number 4, Mike, you've already brought it up. Is a modern day classic, and I refuse to slap like this elevated horror thing onto it because I don't even know what that fucking means. Honestly,
I know what we're gonna say.
It is Hereditary. I think this is an absolute masterpiece from the filmmaking perspective, from the acting perspective, from the mythos of it. I just think it's very effective all the way through. You don't know where it's going. I mean, I remember seeing the trailers and the little girl, and she looks kind of nothing to that little girl, but she does look a little creepy, right? And I'm like, okay, they're setting it up that she's going to be possessed or something like that. And then, a third of the way in,
she meets a telephone pole.
I'm like, oh, where's it going to go now? And it just kept me guessing all the way through. And I absolutely loved it. Ari Aster, I hated Midsummer. I thought that was terrible.
I think our friend Jeff's going to be very disappointed to hear that, Mark.
Hereditary, I think, is a modern day classic. So.
Great performances in that film, and it's funny as well. Like Paul and I started ironically calling it Hereditary at one point, and I've got to the point now where I forget that it's not actually called that, and I'll be talking to people. I'll be like, "Have you seen Hereditary?" and then I'm like, "Shit, it's not actually called that." People are looking at me like I don't realise that what it's actually called. But no, I use that as an example, and I think that the elevated horror film, that's not the film's fault. I think that's kind of that's just a kind of douchey film Twitter thing. I think this idea that some people are kind of embarrassed to admit that they enjoy horror movies, so they have to say, well, this isn't actually a horror film, this is a psychological film about this and that. And I think people use that sometimes to apologetically sort of justify their film predilections, and I don't think you need to do that. But that's not the filmmaker's fault or the film. And Hereditary is a great film.
I personally enjoyed it. However, Mark, one of the things that you pointed out that you liked so much about it really detracted for me. There were too many curveballs in this movie, and I do feel like it took something away from me anyway. But that aside, I do think it was a well done movie, and the performances were fantastic.
Oh, Jim, sorry, I meant to ask you just to get an idea. So, can you give your ratings for your favorite movie so far?
My favorite movie so far?
Yeah, so Friday the 13th and Poltergeist.
Well, Poltergeist is a 10 out of 10. It'll always be a 10 out of 10. Friday the 13th is going to be a solid 7.
Okay. All right. If you just tell us, as we go along, I'm just interested.
Okay.
Okay, Mike, you're number 3.
Okay, my number 3 is a film from the greatest movie year since in my lifetime, certainly. A couple of films I'm going to cover here do straddle genres, but in all of these cases, these are films where I think that the horror elements of it make it work. And this is 1982's The Thing, John Carpenter.
Oh, you'll never get a complaint from us on that thing. This
is one of those. I think there's maybe 5 perfect films. I think Alien is a perfect film. I think Back to the Future, I think, is a perfect film. And I think The Thing is an absolutely perfect film. It's whenever a new medium comes along. So when Blu-ray came along, or in 4K, or when I got my first projector, this is always one of the first films that I watch. It's kind of one of my library films, I guess you'd call it. I just think that on an aesthetic level, that kind of high contrast, the kind of the black of night, the white of the snow, the flares, just that alone is incredible. And that's before you even get into, Rob Bottin's work on that film, before you even get into the fact that the paranoia of the film has become almost a genre shorthand. They'll be like, oh, this is the episode of the X-Files where they do the thing. It's become a shorthand in film terminology. Incredible performances, incredible beards in the film as well, which is obviously, very important. And, there's a great narrative behind this film, like the fact that it came out, I think, the same month as E.T., and people just weren't in the mood for, such an aggressive, abrasive film as this. But yeah, I mean, The Thing is one of those movies where I could sit down and I could probably just freestyle about this film for a couple of hours. I remember extremely clearly. You talk about childhood and childhood memories. I will never forget the sequence, of course, the heart attack resuscitators. When it all kicks off, that whole sequence, and that's before you even get into. I mean, think about the spectrum of this film. On the one hand, you've got the insanity of heads turning into spiders and people's arms being bitten off by chest mouths. And then you've got incredible scenes of tension of just people having blood tests. The fact that one film and one filmmaker and one company of creatives can create a film so dynamic that it has two such extremely different forms of tension in the one film. Hitchcock would be great at certain things. Dario Argento's great at certain things. Brian De Palma's great at certain things. But if you think about just the diversity of effective moments in this film and the performances and the aesthetics, it's frigging peerless.
I don't disagree. I absolutely... So I probably don't have as much love as most people do for this movie, but it is a movie that I will watch whenever it's on. I think it's really well done. The performances are great, and every aspect of the movie, from the practical effects, because I do really have a thing for practical effects. The practical effects, the performances, like you said, the paranoia, all of that make it a great film.
It's one of the best paced films ever made as well.
I do not disagree.
Just the right pace.
Yep.
It's fantastic, and I'm with you, Mike. It is one of my... I bought it in VHS. I bought it in DVD. I bought it on Blu-ray.
Oh yeah, when Data Crystals come out, I'll buy it on Data Crystal.
And one of my other movies on here is going to be the same thing. I mean, I don't know how many copies of certain movies. I know the Evil Dead movies because there was multiple different versions that they released. It's like, okay, I'll buy that one. I'll buy that one. But the funny thing is, I would love to have been in Norway to watch this movie, right? Because at the start, they give it away, but it's in Norwegian.
Right.
I've
never even considered that.
Yeah, the guy shooting at the dog in Norwegian, I guess something like, get away from it, it's not a real dog, it's something else. But yeah, it's and whenever we look at trilogies, Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy, I think, is hard to beat.
Yeah,
I don't disagree.
And actually, The Thing was my number 3 too. So, Jim.
So my number 3 is again purely nostalgic. Well, not purely, but for most of the reason I picked number 3 is it's going to be A Nightmare on Elm Street. And the reason that I picked A Nightmare on Elm Street is because of the circumstance of my first viewing of this film. And I'm sure anybody that's listened to any episodes already knows this story. But for you, Mike, I will retell this story.
Please do.
I was somewhere between 7 and 9 years old, and we had just gotten HBO. And, I came down to get ready for school because, we had a 2-story house. And my mother says to me, oh, by the way, I taped your favorite movie off of HBO last night because we could do that, right? I said, okay, well, what was it? And she's like, don't worry, we'll watch it when you get home. Okay. So I'm all excited. I was excited. I didn't know, I wanted to see this movie because I love movies. And I get home and I decide, you know what, Mom, let's watch the movie. She said, no, we'll watch it when it gets dark. And I said, well, I want to see it. I want to know what it is. And she said, don't worry about it. We'll watch it when it gets dark. So then I decided to start going through the TV guide. And I look in the back of the TV guide where it shows all the movies and their descriptions. And I said, well, there's only one movie on that I would want to see based on the description. And I don't remember what the description TV guide said about it. But she said, well, what movie is it? I said, A Nightmare on Elm Street. She goes, well, I guess you'll find out after dark what movie I taped. And it did turn out to be A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I just remember the rapture from watching Freddy chase Tina into her backyard when he first cuts off his fingers, and the special effects, and like just the thought I had of being pulled into a dream where somebody could actually hurt me. It was exciting. Like, and it's still to this day when I watch it, I get excited, and I probably am going to be in the minority here, but I love every film in the series, for better or worse, for that particular reason, because of my love for the first film. I have nothing but love for any movie in that series, except for the remake. It's hot garbage.
It's such an incredible idea. Just the idea of the film is just, how did somebody not have that idea before?
Agreed.
Well,
it was there. You know, it was just out there.
Didn't Dreamscape come out the same year?
Yeah, but I mean, that wasn't that venture. But Dream.
I agree. It's such. And whenever you listen to Wes Craven about the different elements that he grabbed from, like the Freddy Krueger was some guy that he saw outside his bedroom window as a kid,
right?
And then like the dreaming stuff, he read a newspaper article about I think it was in the Philippines or somewhere where so some teenagers were like terrified to go to sleep, and they would do the same thing Nancy did and kind of sneak coffee, but they eventually died, so he incorporated that. And this was a real risk for New World, right?
Yep.
New World, right?
New Line. Yeah.
And this really, this series and this idea really set it apart from the other slashers. The slasher craze was already on its way, but making it more fantastical was such a great way to separate it.
It's so much more sophisticated than Jason and Michael Myers. I mean, if you think about how it's a little bit like what I was saying about The Thing, in the way that the thing about the Nightmare films is there's so many good elements. I mean, first of all, you've just got the visual design of Freddy, just the what he looks like, and the clothes, and the knives on his hand, and of course Robert Englund and the kind of the humour that he brought to that character. Then you've got this idea of the dream world, this kind of fantasy, mythological element to it as well. And then on top of that, you've got all of the fun with the teenagers and the fact that you had people like Heather Langenkamp and Johnny Depp and like all of these great performers in the films as well. But I just think that and this would really be realised, of course, in the third movie, where I think that they realised, actually, this is as much a fantasy genre series as it is a horror. And I think that when they started leaning into that, and then in later films you'd have things like Time Loop and other genre conceits as well, there's such elasticity and potential for creativity within the framework of that idea.
And they did. So you have the first film, which is a straight-up slasher flick, but it starts to blend. I mean, by the end of the movie, you don't know what's real and what's a dream anymore. So they really start blending the dream from reality, and you don't know where that movie actually ends, because if you watch the end of the first film, they drive away and all of a sudden the car starts locking up. The top of his convertible now looks like Freddy's sweater. So you don't know if she's still dreaming or if, they're all going to be dead.
Well,
and then...
sorry, and I don't think you can underplay that Freddy has a personality in this, right? He talks. You have the Jasons and the Michaels, and it's almost like they're machines just doing it, right?
Right.
Because they were programmed to. Freddy's having fun.
Yeah. But he didn't really start having fun, in my opinion, until the second movie, which I know gets pretty panned, for being homoerotic.
He's cutting his fingers off in the first one. He's laughing. He
is.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a fair point, Mark, as well, because I mean, I've heard that a lot, this idea that Freddy really didn't become the personality in later films. It is there in the first film, but I also get what you're saying, Jim. This isn't the welcome to primetime bitch Freddy either.
But if you contrast even the first one, where it is toned down, but it's there.
Yeah,
compared
it is.
to the other slasher. I mean, even the ones where there's just regular human slashers involved.
Well, they were those first wave of slashers. They were coming out on the back of Jaws in many ways. That was the big blockbuster, and Jaws, obviously was an animal, was a force of nature, and I think that was very much the mandate for those films was that the villains were essentially a MacGuffin. They were a driving force of nature. And I think that the idea of giving them a personality was just one of the many smart things about the first Elm Street.
Right. And so it's not that I don't think that Freddy in the first film has a personality. It's just, it's more on display starting with number 2 when he starts to possess Jesse. He really becomes a tormentor in that movie. Whereas he's just trying to scare you in the first movie. And then in the third movie, it just gets to be a bunch of fantastic one-liners that just make him overall a great character, in my opinion.
I think part 3 is the best in that series. I think that's the pinnacle of getting Freddy just tonally right, where he's still an asshole laughing, but he's still scary, and he's not too over the top. But anyway, Jim, what is your rating for A Nightmare on Elm Street?
9 out of 10.
Wow. Okay, Mike, on to number 2.
Okay, I'm going to cheat with this one. This is technically not a film.
Oh boy!
But it was in some territories. In its native land, it was actually a TV miniseries, but it was released theatrically in Europe. This is, I think, it's 1979's Tobe Hooper's TV miniseries Salem's Lot.
I didn't realize that was released as a film. Okay.
Yeah, in Europe, they edited it down from the 290 minutes to the 3 hours to 120 minutes, and they added some more gore in because they didn't have to worry about the standards and practice. So there is a theatrical cut of this that was released. Having said that, I first saw this as the over 2 nights miniseries, probably when it first aired in the UK. We used to get stuff quite late after the States, so this would have been about 81, 82. And this is very much in the camp of nostalgia in the way that this was probably the first... this is probably the first thing kind of harder than Jaws that I'd ever seen. Okay. And I rewatched this again recently, and it really stands up. And I think part of that is you can really see Tobe Hooper, the filmmaker, that kind of just the dirtiness, the decay that you see in his kind of redneck horrors is here. The Marston House from this, I think, is one of the great horror buildings. I'll take that over the Overlook. And over, any other horror environment that you've got. There's something about that place. But the thing I love about this, and I've said this a lot of the time on my podcast, one of the things that I love the most about films, one of the reasons why I love science fiction so much as well as horror, is I love films that create a sense of a world, where you inhabit a world. It's probably why I like Dawn of the Dead so much. And one of the things that's amazing about Salem's Lot is you really get a sense of the town, the whole town, as you got in King's book. And I just think it's tremendously effective. But I also think there's a couple of the all-time great horror movie moments. I think the Glick boys hovering at the window, I think is one of the most effective, scarring, nightmarish things I ever saw as a kid. My parents were pretty tough on what I was allowed to watch when I was a kid. And I think that because this was a TV movie, it got through. But there's still some incredible scares. And Reggie Nolder's kind of Nosferatu-esque vampire, which is a real departure from the book, to be fair. There's a jump scare with him that's pretty incredible. Even David Soul is amazing in this. There's this great sequence where he's telling the story to an old school teacher of his about when he went into the Marston house as a child and he found Hubie Marston, the owner of the house, hanging dead, and then he opened his eyes. Is one of the all-time greats. And I just think that this film, because of the 3-hour runtime afforded to it and the violence limitations, which meant they had to go old school, is just a tremendously effective film, but also introduced me to the genre. And so for those reasons, I'll go, Salem's Lot, Tobe Hooper. My favourite Tobe Hooper film, controversially.
And of course, the legendary James Mason.
Well, yes, and I'll tell you what, to this day, I wish I could do a James Mason impression. It sounds like an incredibly satisfying impression to do, but I can't pull it off.
Yeah. Jim, Salem's Lot.
So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I remember seeing it in the 80s. and I don't think I've seen it since. I do remember the feeling, like you mentioned the scene with the boy floating outside the window and that kind of stuff. I do remember enjoying that, and I remember liking it enough to watch the sequel, which obviously wasn't as good. But
the sequel's amazing.
I think that was one of those. I think that was just a vampire movie, and they slapped the name Salem's Lot on it. It was pretty.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it was just one of the Return to Salem's Lot. That's kind of a fun film in its own weird, straight to video kind of way, but it's not really a sequel to Salem's Lot.
No. Although I am curious what you think, Mike. Have you seen the Chapelwaite series?
No, I've got that, and I want to see that because I do understand that does have that connection.
It does, and I got to be honest, I love it. I think it is so well done, and it's fantastic. So I strongly recommend you pick that up.
I'll move that to the top of the pile.
Yeah.
So, Return to Salem's Lot, I rewatched recently, and this is a Larry Cohen movie.
Of course it is, isn't it? That mad bastard.
And I'll have another movie to talk about of his, but it is bonkers. Michael Moriarty is just insane. Yeah. It's such a fun movie. But
is it they're writing, like, they want him to write the Vampire Bible? Is that the storyline? Am I remembering correctly?
Yes. Yeah. They want him as like a disciple, I think.
Yeah.
But I believe they're doing a remake of Salem's Lot.
They are.
And Bill Pullman's son starring in that, but it's had its release date delayed about 5 times, so there's a bit of negative noise around that one, I think.
As far as Salem's Lot, I think the biggest thing about it that I like is just the overall atmosphere. It's just creepy. Everything just feels creepy about it. The characters feel creepy. The setting's creepy. The direction's kind of creepy.
You know how I describe Salem's Lot vibe-wise? You know when you go into a really old person's house and they've been living on their own for a long time, maybe their partner passed away and they've been living on their own for a while, and they've got like the magazines piled up and old books, and everything's just slightly starting to get a little bit stale. Mm-hmm. The film feels like 3 hours of that.
It's like on the cover art, it'd be like musty.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair.
Okay, Jim.
So my number 2 is going to come as no surprise to Mark. Well, it might actually, because he probably expects it to be my number 1. But my number 2 is Alien. And it's because, to me, it is a perfect film. You have the claustrophobia. And I have a thing for strong female characters. So I was immediately drawn to Ripley. And the performances in the film are fantastic. From Veronica Cartwright, and having her total breakdowns. Tom Skerritt is absolutely fantastic in the movie. The chestburster scene is iconic, and it still to this day gets me every single time. I can't say enough about this movie. This is a perfect film for me.
Yeah,
and you want to talk influential as well. I mean, Christ, it took that kind of used universe that George Lucas had sort of brought in, and it took it to that next level. The idea, space truckers and just that whole thing. Yeah, and if you look at the way that's not had a knock-on effect, not just in films, but like if you go into and play, go to like a Laser Quest place. Yeah, you'll see it'll look like you're an alien. That's just become part of the language of the genre.
It has, and it's funny too. There's another story about this film too. Because when
I like it, but I like Aliens even more.
Oh, shut up, Mark. But so I have a story about this film too. When I was a kid, it would come on TV a lot, and when I was homesick, for some reason, my grandfather would come check on me, and every time he came in, it was when Sigourney Weaver was changing from her spacesuit to go into hypersleep, and he was convinced every single time he'd come in, you just want to see her naked.
He didn't buy into the whole. I admire strong. I'll have you know, I admire strong women.
Yeah.
That only happens once. So, did you keep rewinding it?
No, because it was always on TV. It just so happens he would walk into the living room while I'm laying down watching TV, and it's always that same scene in that same movie.
Yeah.
You should have turned it back around on him and be like, "Hey, you're the perv who keeps walking in on this film during this scene." Got a glass against the door.
Yeah, I probably should have, but I was too afraid of him. I would never have talked back.
Uh, okay. Alien.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
I think, it is absolute. Just.
did you still want me to rate it, Mark?
Oh yes, yes.
A 3 out of 10. I'm kidding.
You're a complicated man, Jim.
I am. No, this is definitely a 10 out of 10 for me.
Okay. My number 2 used to be my number 1 for a long, long, long time. Is Jaws. I'm curious. Is Jaws on either one of your lists?
It is.
It is not on mine, and neither's Alien. But that's just me being weird about what I consider to be horror.
Oh, that's okay. That's fair.
Yeah. And again, it's it's very subjective, right?
Yeah.
The idea of being hunted and attacked by a shark is just terrifying. And since I moved from Northern Ireland to Florida, it's much more likely to happen.
That's true.
Just a bit.
Yeah, just a little.
But I mean, it is a perfect movie.
It is.
It's a jaunty sea adventure with horrific deaths.
Yes, I do agree. It is. It is another perfect movie.
Right.
That's why it's my number 1.
One of the things about Jaws that changes for me as I get older is how much of the film is about being a parent and responsible for a family. Just the fact that, and the sequel as well, and Jaws 2 as well, just the fact that how stressful his job is and trying to balance his family life. It's gone from being this rompy adventure to being a metaphor for what a fucking hassle being an adult is.
Yeah, that's true.
You've got old.
That's what's going on here.
Yep.
It's like the Family Guy episode whenever Brian has a son. I don't know. Yeah. And they're all like, "Hey, Brian, imagine if your son fell out of a window." And he's like, "No." But he didn't care.
I'm obviously in the minority here because I don't have any of those worries. Just saying.
Well, imagine it's one of your dogs.
I'd probably throw them, so that doesn't count. That doesn't track.
Mike, I think we're down to number 1.
We are?
Yes, my number 1, my favourite horror of all time, and I think probably, in my opinion, the greatest film ever made is The Exorcist. I mean, Christ. it's this great little genre movie from the 70s. And it's one of those films that just, I didn't see, I mean, this was banned in the UK for the longest time. I don't think it actually got an official release until the 90s.
Wow.
I think that it's probably worth, I mean, I grew up Catholic. I'm not practicing as such, certainly not in my adulthood, but I grew up around the kind of the iconography and the imagery. Mm-hmm. So anything to do with religion, always just felt that little bit more believable, because it was part of the fabric, the devil, and all of these things were part of the fabric that I'd been brought up to believe in literally. Okay. I'd had adults tell me as a child that this stuff is real. And even by the time I'd got to The Exorcist, I'd become an adult and I had a very different view of those things. I'm not going to go into that. I don't want to offend anyone, but, I did not feel that way. But I think that, it's the damage had been done, So I think that films, and when I mentioned this whole idea about childhood, not just being nostalgia, I think that films like The Exorcist and The Omen have an extra little bit of secret sauce to them. But also just the fact that Friedkin and Blatty, how they were both fighting with each other when they were making this film about what it was going to be, and how that tension actually works for the benefit of the film. But really, it's just the verisimilitude of the film as well. The fact that it's played, it's not made, they don't make it like it's a horror movie. They are making a straight drama, and it's been made as well as anything that Coppola or Scorsese was doing at the time. It just happens to be a horror film, and I think that realism, and also we all know the money shots in that film and all of the shocking moments, but to me, there's a real creeping dread to The Exorcist that's bigger than the film. And there's a scene where the Ellen Bernstein character, where the mother's sat in the kitchen, and it's after one of these big scenes. It's like the quiet moment, and she's just sat there in the kitchen, and you can hear something in the room, and it's just the idea that there's something upstairs. That upstairs there's something in that room, and we don't understand it, and it used to be her daughter. Is just such a powerful piece of art and the way that the music and the aesthetics and all of these things come together, and the fact that it's just this battle between good and evil, and the simplicity of that is just. This is one of those films. I mean, I've read all the making ofs, I've seen the documentaries, so I know how they made the film. I've heard all the tales about, how terribly treated the actors were, and freaking letting off guns next to people's heads and all that stuff. That now, God, imagine if you did that now. But to me, this film still just appeared fully formed out of the ether, and I can't imagine it being made. It's just this perfect, incredible, dark, weird thing, and one of the greatest examples of what film can do, and certainly one of the greatest examples of what cinema can do. But yeah, The Exorcist, it just doesn't get much better than this.
I don't disagree. I think it's a perfect film. It's absolutely well done. It's well acted, and you said to you it was more about a battle for good and evil, but for me, and it's probably because I was I looked at it a little differently, because I've always viewed that movie as not necessarily good versus evil, more I looked at it more like a mother fighting for her daughter. So she's so lost and does so out of ideas on how she can help fight that she goes to the people that she would never have thought of because she has nothing left.
Ellen Burstyn is amazing in this movie.
Yes,
like the part whenever the doctors are saying, "Hey, maybe go see a priest," and she's like, especially and probably one of the most horrific parts in the movie is Reagan in the hospital as they're doing the tests on her.
Oh my God, the realism in that film. Oh,
and she's like, you're all experts, and you want to send me to a witch doctor, and she's just freaking out, and it's just amazing. I think another great one of those underlying character kind of arcs is Karras, right? So he comes from, he's losing his faith, right? At the start, he feels guilty about his mother. Where's his mother gone, right? She's died, and he's losing his faith. And then it's even whenever Ellen Burstyn comes to him, he's like, no, exorcism, that's kind of old school. You need to go see a psychiatrist. So he's kind of already you can just tell that character is probably in the wrong place as far as being a priest. He's he probably wants out of it. But Blatty was he was a very, very strong Catholic, right? And you can see how he moves that character around to disbelief to basically committing suicide, right? And it's just such an interesting journey.
And the gravitas as well, the fact that I think it can't be understated how important it was that Friedkin made the decision to take it seriously.
Yeah.
And I think that just the very act of making a prestige film, I mean, people forget how big this film was. People talk about Jaws and Star Wars, but really, if you want to talk about setting the precedent for opening films wide across large numbers of cinemas across the States, it was The Exorcist. It's a huge deal.
Agreed.
So, just a couple other things. One of the few horror movies that has an actual serial killer as an actor in it. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And then Friedkin went on and interviewed him, right? For the Al Pacino movie,
Cruising,
which was loosely based on that guy,
right?
That was a bit part actor in The Exorcist. It's amazing. Mike, have you seen The Ninth Configuration?
Oh, Jesus.
I have not. No, amazingly. That's one of those films that I've circled for years, but I have not. That's Blatty, is it?
It is the true sequel to The Exorcist, but it is not an exorcisty sort of movie. It is a dark comedy, philosophical, religious discussion with a really suspenseful action ending.
Well, Blatty was a humorist, wasn't he? As a writer, and you can see that in The Exorcist 3 as well. You get a lot of the conversations between George C. Scott and I can't remember the actor's name, but the priest character in that. There's a kind of witty timbre to those conversations.
Right. Ned Flanders, not Ned Flanders, Ed Flanders.
Ed Flanders, yes. Who was also in Salem's Lot as well, and still elsewhere, of course.
Yeah, and he was in the Ninth Configuration. It is full of genre stars.
Oh, nice.
Karras, who played Karras?
Oh God, I don't remember his name.
But you should really look it up. Now, it's the ultimate definition of a cult movie.
I'll take a look.
Fantastic.
I give Mark shit about that movie all the time because he brings it up every time we talk about The Exorcist, but it is a very interesting movie.
I'll take a look.
It has Scott Wilson as the lead, and he is amazing in it.
And when was that made?
It was made early 80s. Okay, so let me read you the cast real quick. So we have Stacy Keach, Scott Wilson, Jason Miller, that was Karras, Ed Flanders, Neville Brand, Moses Gunn, Robert Loggia, Joe Spinell, Tom Atkins, Richard Lynch. I mean, it's just amazing.
Wow, throw in Frank Silver and you've got the whole set there, haven't you?
But yeah, definitely check it out. I'll be
wow, yeah, that's. I'll tell you, I'm coming out with some good recommendations on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Jim.
No, we already did my number one. It was Jaws.
Oh, okay. So we're down to my number one. So my number one is a more recent movie, which dethroned Jaws, and we kind of mentioned it earlier on because I made Jim watch it. It's Pascal Loegier's Martyrs. Wow. I think this is near a perfect horror movie as anything. It has right turns everywhere. It's beautifully directed, wonderfully acted. It's brutal. It's got such a wonderful, wonderful ending that's just so open for interpretation that, you know, you can just sit there and discuss that ending and everybody can come up with different ideas and they're all equally valid. It's not for the faint of heart.
No.
But it is so effective and I love it.
It's it's a really deep film as well, I think, Martyrs, isn't it? And I think for a lot of people, though, it got a little bit lost because it came out during a time when there was a lot of tough horror movies came out. I think Inside came out around the same time.
It was a new wave of French horror at that time.
Yeah. And then, and of course, you had Serbian film was a little later, but around roughly the same time. And I think that it got kind of lost in the pack of the kind of the endurance test horror movies. But I think Martyrs it's got its own stuff going on for sure.
Yeah, I can't say enough about it. It is fantastic. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mark, we watched that as an episode for the podcast, so because I had not seen it before, and I thought it was a really well done film. I'm obviously not as in love with it as Mark is, because I don't like the ending. Okay. But I think it's a really well done movie.
Nice and neat, don't you?
Yes, I do.
No ambiguity for Jim.
Nope.
Simple answers.
I do.
Okay, so Mike, you were the first guest that we've had on that I really don't need to explain what we're doing next.
Oh boy, here we go. Let me.
Yep.
Before we go into that one, Mark, I wanted to. Before I forgot, Mike, I wanted to tell you about the New Zealand mutant books. So there is a series of books called The Extinction Cycle by Nicholas Sansbury Smith.
Yeah.
It takes place all over the world. However, there's an offshoot by an author called Adrian J. Smith. It's called Extinction New Zealand, and I believe it's a 3-book series. So if you like science fiction mutant stories, they're fantastic.
I am noting that down. Wonderful. There's little to no genre stuff really in New Zealand, so just seeing Kiwi place names within that context will be awesome.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Okay. So before we do the top 5 most fun horror movies, Mike, you're the only guest so far. I probably don't have to explain the rules for our speed round, since it's where I kind of came up with the idea and sent it over to you, and you and Paul do the speed round.
Yes.
Of verses. Now, I guess the only caveat, I don't know if I ever mentioned this, but you can use whichever version of the movie that you want. So I say Evil Dead, You can use a remake or the original, whatever you want.
Okay.
But again, my main focus is just to come up with funny versus names.
I think we get the conceit there, Mark.
Yeah, I know it's very deep. It's very deep. Okay, so we will go ahead, and Mike, you have the first choice, and then Jim. And if you haven't seen it, you can say skip. The Burning versus Fire in the Sky.
The Burning.
Fire in the Sky.
Ooh. Okay, Green Room versus The Green Mile.
Oh, Green Mile.
I have not seen Green Room, so I would have to go with Green Mile.
Okay. Mommy Dearest versus Stepfather.
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 Human Centipede versus A Bug's Life.
I'm going to have to go for A Bug's Life on that one.
Yeah, me too, because I didn't like Human Centipede.
Brightburn versus Dark City.
Dark City.
Oh, God. Oh. Yeah, I'll go with Dark City. I really like that movie.
Dog Soldiers versus Cat's Eye.
Dog Soldiers.
Yep, Dog Soldiers.
Creep Show versus Crawl.
Creep Show.
Oh God. I got to go with Crawl. That was a lot of fun.
Scream versus Hush.
Scream.
Yeah, Scream.
The Witch versus Warlock.
I'm going to go Warlock.
Yeah, me too, because I hate The Witch.
By the way, Julian Sands, just breaks my heart.
Has anything come of that yet?
He is not being found yet.
No, that's not happening, is it?
That's a shame.
And he was at the convention that me and Jim go to a number of years ago, and I never met him, but I took a pretty funny picture because he was talking to somebody dressed as a big pink bunny rabbit. Anyway, he's such a great actor, too.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, okay. Here we go. 47 Meters Down versus Don't Breathe.
Don't Breathe.
Yeah, I'll go with Don't Breathe.
Rabid versus Cujo.
Rabid.
Cujo.
The Black Phone versus One Missed Call.
The Black Phone.
The Black Phone. It's not even a contest.
Lair of the White Worm versus Slither.
Ooh.
I've got to go for Slither.
I'm going with Lair of the White Worm.
Ken Russell Craziness.
Yeah, that was a tough one. It's always those really different ones that are hard to call.
Yeah, I know.
The Shallows versus Deep Blue Sea.
Deep Blue Sea.
Yeah, that's not even a contest.
Yeah, I figured that would be a Deep Blue Sea winner. Wrong Turn versus The Lost Boys.
Oh, The Lost Boys.
Yeah, Lost Boys, 100%.
What We Do in the Shadows versus The Prowler.
The Prowler.
What We Do in the Shadows, 100%.
I'm going to lose my New Zealand card here by saying that. I think I realise.
I know, right?
I live in the part of Wellington where that was filmed and set as well. It's like literally in the heart of it as well. But I love The Prowler.
Event Horizon versus The Black Hole.
Oh, they're the same film, really, story-wise. But nice work there. I'm going to have to go for The Black Hole out of sheer nostalgia. But Event Horizon's a better film.
Yeah, I'm going through Event Horizon.
The Blob versus The Stuff.
Oh, that hurts, Mark.
That is a tricky one, but I'm going to go The Blob, the remake.
The remake.
This stuff. Every day.
Hostel versus Hotel Transylvania.
I was about to say, I watched this with my kids the other day, and then thought, I don't need to clarify which one I'm talking about there, do I? I'll go Hostel.
Yeah, I'm going Hostel.
Angel Heart versus Hellboy.
Angel Heart.
Hellboy.
Tusk versus Antlers.
Tusk.
Yeah, 100%.
Silent Hill versus A Quiet Place.
Quiet Place.
Quiet Place.
Piranha versus Anaconda.
Piranha.
Anaconda. I had so much more fun watching that movie.
I need to rewatch Anaconda.
Yeah. When John Voight winks, that just did it for me. That cemented it as a fantastic film. after the Anaconda throws him up and he winks, I was done. I loved
Yeah,
it.
because as you're about to be swallowed by a giant snake, you wink. Makes sense.
Oh no, he was already swallowed. The anaconda regurgitates him,
Oh,
and he winks before he falls over dead.
well, you wink before you die.
Yeah.
All right. The eye versus teeth.
Teeth.
I have to go with the eye because I've never seen teeth.
It's about vagina dentata.
Yes, I know what it's about.
People love saying that. Podcasters are never happier than when they're saying vagina dentata.
Mimic versus dead ringers.
Dead ringers.
I'm going mimic.
And they're remaking Dead Ringers.
Yeah, I just saw that. It's a series they're doing.
Yeah, with a female. What's her? I don't remember what female lead. I'm like,
oh yeah, it's Rachel Weisz, isn't it? I think
Rachel Weisz. Yeah, like, I wonder what they're going to do with that.
Yeah, I'm not. I got to be honest. I have not seen the original, but I read this new premise for Rachel Weisz, and I'm not on board yet. So I hope it's better than I expect it to be.
Well, yeah, we all want good things, Jim. Pumpkinhead versus Leatherface.
Leatherface.
Pumpkinhead.
Now, this is the most recent one, right? That's
Yes.
the one called Leatherface.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Pumpkinhead then.
Yeah. Jim?
Oh, Pumpkinhead. I already said it.
Yeah, okay. World War Z versus War of the Worlds.
I'm one of the few people who actually enjoyed it, so I'm going to say World War Z.
And I'm going to go with War of the Worlds, the TV show. The newest
deep.
one.
Nice.
I really thought it was really well done.
Mike, do you remember Tripods?
I do, yeah. That was that kind of BBC 80s. I think that's one that's probably best left in the memory.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Grave Encounters versus Pet Cemetery.
Pet Cemetery.
Pet Cemetery.
Wolf Creek versus Black Sheep.
Wolf Creek.
Wolf Creek.
Ooh, isn't Black Sheep another New Zealand one, Mike?
It is. I'm ought for two.
Night of the Demons versus Day of the Dead.
Day of the Dead.
Night of the Demons, because I haven't seen Day of the Dead. We've already discussed that.
Children of the Corn versus Children of Man.
Oh, Children of Men.
Children of Corn.
1408 versus 1917.
1408.
1408, because 1917 was boring as hell.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo versus a Hobo with a Shotgun.
Man, I wish that was a film.
Right.
What a tonal rabbit out of the hat that would be if you could pull that film off, eh?
Right.
I'm going to go Hobo with a Shotgun.
And I'm going to go with the Dragon Tattoo, because I haven't seen Hobo with a Shotgun.
Prince of Darkness versus The Princess Bride.
Oh, that's difficult.
That sucks.
I've got to go Princess Bride, but it's close.
Yeah, I got to go with Princess Bride, too.
Outbreak versus Quarantine.
Outbreak.
Yeah, Outbreak, because I hated Quarantine.
This one is for the smart people. Okay.
I'm out.
Firestarter versus Prometheus.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Very clever. But Firestarter 84, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, agreed. Firestarter.
Split versus Splice.
Split.
Rosemary's Baby versus Whatever Happened to Baby Jane.
Rosemary's Baby.
Baby Jane.
Deep Rising versus Falling Down.
Deep Rising.
Yeah, Deep Rising.
Ooh, love Falling Down, though.
Oh, that's great, too.
Young Frankenstein versus Old Boy.
Old Boy.
Young Frankenstein.
An American Werewolf in London versus American Psycho.
Werewolf in London.
You're not going to like me, Mark. American Psycho.
No, I already don't like you.
I know.
VHS versus Videodrome.
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 Sunshine versus Pitch Black.
Pitch Black.
Pitch Black.
The Host versus The Guest.
The Guest.
I don't know that I've seen The Guest.
You
So
probably haven't seen The Host either, have you?
I have not. No.
A big recommend for the guests. We've got a real nice kind of John Carpenter vibe about it.
Oh, nice. I'll have to look that up then.
It's one of the best interloper type movies.
Okay.
The Orphanage versus The Orphan, or just Orphan, I guess.
The Orphanage.
Yeah, The Orphanage, 100%.
Okay, and finally we have April Fool's Day versus May versus Juno versus Born on the 4th of July.
Oh, God.
I'm going to go for April Fool's Day because I watched it yesterday.
Well, I have so much love for April Fool's Day, I have to go with May because that movie was fantastic.
Okay, that was the end of our speed round. Thank you all for playing.
Thank you for putting that together.
Yeah. Okay, top 5 fun movies. So, whenever it comes to horror and fun, I mean, a lot of mine is made up of horror comedies, but you can have fun with ones that aren't.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, what is your number 5?
I'm a little time poor at the moment, so I might just blast through these 5 in one go, if that's okay with you guys.
Sure.
Awesome. Okay. I've sort of gone for fun, but also maybe a little bit of guilty pleasure about it as well. So I've got, and many of these as well could have made my top 10 because it's such a fine line. But for me, the first one that sprung to mind, Friday the 13th Part 6, my favourite Friday the 13th film. It's ridiculous. Okay. It completely captures the vibe. When it came out, I was the perfect age for it. I was probably about 14, 15. Mm-hmm. And when I think about being a teenager in the 1980s, I think about this film. And it's got an Alice Cooper score as well, so love it. I'd also mention Bad Taste, Kiwi movie. Yep. Peter Jackson, insane film. Will never forget the first time that I watched it. I would also say my favourite Nightmare on Elm Street film, Elm Street 3. Mm-hmm. That was definitely, and I don't even think that this is a guilty pleasure one, but it's certainly fun. I think that this was the pinnacle of I think that when, like a lot of these franchises, they kind of get sillier and sillier and sillier, and then they get too silly, and then they get too silly, and then they reboot. I think that this was at the perfect point in that trajectory where they realised that they could actually do a lot of really great kind of almost science fiction fantasy things with it, and it's just a super entertaining, smart film. I'd also say The Fog, really underrated John Carpenter film that really captures... I love the sense of place with that film. I love the fact that it's this little sleepy coastal town, and Adrienne Barbeau has a late-night radio show where she speaks in a husky, sexy voice, and the film opens with an old man reading a spooky story around a campfire to kids. It just captures that kind of spookiness that films of that era had in a really nice comfort watch kind of way. And last but not least, Society, the Brian Yuzna film. This insane, gloopy film that's actually... I don't know whether it's a really dumb, smart film or a really smart, dumb film. I don't know where it exists on that trajectory, but it's kind of... It's gloopier than any smart film has the right to be, and it's smarter than any insane film has the right to be as well. And again, I'll never forget seeing that film for the first time. I wanted to mention that. So, yep, they're my five bits of fun.
Just for time's sake, Jim, I think we'll move past our picks.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just go on to what we've watched.
Okay.
So, Mike, is there anything that you've watched in the last week or two that you want to bring up?
I will just bring up my Letterboxd and see, because I also have the memory of an old man and the bladder of an infant. So just log in. I'll try not to say my password out loud as I'm doing that. So I think it's mainly...
E-O-R-D.
Where are we? Films, diary... Oh, gosh, I hate this app. I watched Witchboard from 1986. Have you seen this?
Oh, I love that movie. I got to meet Tawny Katane.
Wow, gosh, did she die recently, or did I dream that?
Yeah. So I used to work on a casino ship, and she was one of our special guests around Halloween, and she just walked around the ship with her people, and we got to talk a little bit. She was really nice.
Yeah, and she's great in this. She's really... I mean, obviously, she's a very beautiful woman as well. Yeah. But at the same time, she does... bring it in. And this is a crazy film as well. It's so odd, and it's one of those ones. Sorry,
it's a fun movie.
It is, and it's got that. I mean, I know nothing about this film outside of it. It's one of those ones that I've kind of had on my Plex for the longest time, and it's a bit of a gap. But I haven't read anything about it. But I can only assume that this film, similar to Nightmare on Elm Street 2, has homoerotic subtext readings to it.
Sort of does,
definite kind of interesting dynamic between the two main characters, and also the character that we've been trained to assume that the kind of vaguely preppy James Spadery guy is going to be the villain. And there's a really interesting kind of reversal in this film of how you perceive the two lead characters that I thought worked pretty well. There's some good kills. The only problem with it is so much of the film is people pissing around with Ouija boards. And there'll be times, and it's all done in real time as well, because of course it's from 1986, so it's paced like a film from 1986. So there'll be scenes where they're like, right, okay, and you'll be watching the words getting spelled out, and it's a bit of a boner killer, basically, as far as the tempo of the film goes. But on the whole, it's a nice looking film. It's a fun looking film. It's got that kind of just weird energy that a lot of films from the 80s had, where you're kind of not quite sure how you're meant to feel about certain things. But it's definitely an interesting one. But yeah, I could probably go the rest of my life without looking at a Ouija board again. There's a lot of sequels as well, apparently, so I might dip my toe into some of those as well.
And they're not, they do not, there's nothing in common. Like, you could watch them all independently.
Sure. I assume that would probably be the case.
Yeah.
And they talk about it in the In Search of Darkness Part 3, because I just watched half of it, and it was on it.
Oh, cool.
And I believe they were trying to call it Ouija board, but they couldn't get the rights for it, so that's why they call it Ouija board. Mike, anything else that you've watched you want to bring up?
I watched X and Pearl recently as well. And really enjoyed them. Ty West is interesting character. It's nice to see him kind of back and full power. And Mia Goth, Jesus Christ, what a powerhouse. And these films kind of exist sort of almost on, sort of on the edge of those sort of prestige horror films. There's an interesting sort of subspace, I think, popping up now. I think Barbarian was a little bit like this as well, where it kind of brushes up against the prestige horror, but at the same time has enough of a sense of transgressiveness to still feel very much like a genre film. But I really enjoyed these films. I think I enjoyed them in really different ways. I think they both evoked the eras and the filmmaking eras from when they were made really well. And I think that Pearl has got one of the greatest final shots of a film I've seen in many years as well. But that central performance is something else. Yeah, it really is.
Have you watched Infinity Pool yet?
No. I might be watching that tonight. So gosh, all Mia Goth all the time. She's very prolific.
See, I'm in the minority here. I'm not a fan of Mia Goth. I did not like X, and I have not seen Pearl.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can see that. She's one of those people where I can see her kind of like rankling on the nerves a little bit. But I think that certainly in Pearl, I think that it's one of those performances that it's hard to argue against it, particularly at certain moments. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where I think on a different day, I could have gone a different way on it. But I was there and I was in and I bought in. And I just thought they were both really interesting. And the other thing I think they've got in common with Barbarian, as far as being this kind of like almost fringe horror films, is that sense of anything can happen. Yeah. I think I remember, Barbarian, particularly in that first half hour. Well, actually, once you get past that first act and you move into a different place with a different character, that really unsettles you and creates this sense of like, where the hell is this film going? And I think that both X and Pearl had that as well. And I kind of appreciate that. And
that's the thing. That's the issue I had with Barbarian as well. When it took that right turn and Justin Long showed up, I checked out. I was.
Yeah, it's like From Dusk Till Dawn does that.
It does, and I had a problem with From Dusk Till Dawn originally in the theaters too. It wasn't until a few years later that I watched it and I appreciated it. So
yeah.
Maybe I'll have the same reaction.
You either embrace that or you don't, I guess.
Right.
I don't know if it hangs well together for me, Barbarian. I do like that it gets so weird so quickly, And I guess the director, the first half, right, it was based on a short movie that he made, and that's how we got funding for it. And then he kind of came up with the end on the fly, sorry, not the end, but the second half. And you can kind of, it's like if it was an anthology and those two were in it, I think I'd like it better.
Yeah. You know what saved the second half of Barbarian for me was that I did like all of the kind of subtextual toxic masculinity thing. And I think the thing that was interesting about that was it wasn't just as simple as men bad, women victims. It was this idea with the Justin Long character that when this capacity that we all have to justify what we do, this fact that all of us as human beings do shitty things, and then we talk to that voice in our head and go, well, I did this because of this, and the gymnastics that we sometimes do to justify things. And exactly, and I think the way that it plays that out is really smart. And also, never underestimate how much putting a kitsch early 60s pop song over the end credits of your horror movie can win an audience back. Yep. It's like at the end of Waxworks where you've got like It's My Party and I'll Cry If I Want to Kick You. And on this, you've got Be My Baby. And I think just for chuckle, the irony that you get from that, and of course what that means within the film, save that for me. And I just think but in both cases, in the case of X, and certainly in the case of Barbarian, it was one of those things. And recently as well, another film that I really liked that I could probably argue with for hours about, and I know I'm in a minority, was Halloween Kills. I'd be watching the film, and I would be. We'll save it.
We need a separate episode. For
yeah. I would be watching. I'd be watching the film and liking it. And you'll do this, guys. This is a podcasting thing. Is you start assessing the counter arguments whilst you're watching the movie. I'll be watching it and I'll be thinking, I'm really loving this, but people aren't going to like it because of this, and they're wrong because of this. And I'll be having these conversations with myself whilst I'm watching the film, which is really unhealthy. I mean, talk about not living in the moment. Right. But in both the case, certainly of X and Barbarian, and it's definitely in the case when it comes to Halloween Kills, I was watching it and going, okay, yeah, I can totally see people having I can totally see me on another day having a problem with these films, but I really think that this works because of X, Y, and Z. But I think that,
That's it. That was another watch-along episode we did, and we both have very different opinions.
So just real quick with Barbarian, I think the most interesting thread throughout it, right, because they're two totally separate, it's a game of two halves, as I say, but is about trust, right? Who does the protagonist trust? At the start, she doesn't trust Bill Skarsgård, even though he's bending over backwards to be like, I'm not a creep. He's like,
and as the audience, who do the audience trust? Because we've been trained to look out for certain signifiers in film grammar as to who we trust and who we don't.
But then Justin Long's character, which the audience already knows, is basically a rapist, right? Or he is a rapist. And she trusts him. Mm-hmm. So it's like the guy at the start she doesn't trust, but for as much as we know, he's a nice guy. But, it's placing trust in two separate people and not understanding the difference. So, anyway, Mike, anything else?
Nope, that's all for me.
Okay. Jim, do you have anything? I have a few.
I do have a couple things. You asked me to watch a movie, if you remember, and I did. I watched Skinamarink. I got 7 minutes into the film before I shut it off. That is the worst piece of garbage I've ever seen in my life.
I'm not even going to try with this thing.
It's just all weird camera angles. There's nothing else to this movie. It's weird camera angles and static shots. And
whenever you talk about labeling like elevated horror, I guess this is called analog horror, whatever that means. But I got through like 20, 30 minutes of it, and I'm like, I don't get the appeal, but I guess for like the younger generation, a lot of people find it terrifying because it reminds them of their childhood. I'm like, I don't get it. I could just take a camera and just film the corner of the top of a wall and just have some weird kids in the background, kind of ASMR. Hey, Daddy, well, and then just have like a static shot of a sideboard or this. I'm like,
but why would I've heard this argument, this sort of Gen Z millennial thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why would, and this is a genuine question. I'm not playing devil's advocate here. I want to kind of understand this, but why would that be more effective for a younger audience than us? Is it just that we've forgotten what it's like to be young? Is that the thinking there?
Maybe because when we were younger, we could go out at night and go out on our bikes and do stuff. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe they're used to being locked in. And I guess the whole premise of the movie is their parents are gone in the house, and the doors and windows have gone, or something.
With our generation, it was more party time, and with the younger generation, they're so codependent. It's the end of the world.
I mean, so if there is something just sort of generationally intrinsic to that this triggers, I mean, that is an interesting thing.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to my kids about it. Well, they're not kids anymore, but my son's like, yeah, it's like this sort of thing, and it's all coming from YouTube, and that's where they get a lot of their content and a lot of the kind of creepy stuff. Probably like coming on from like the creepypasta stuff onto YouTube, and
sure.
But I mean, as a movie, like I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is giving me a headache. Like I would rather be painting my walls and looking at it than spend the time watching this.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't we be getting outraged by the things that young people like, not bored?
Yeah,
I mean, this isn't how it's supposed to be. We're meant to be angry, not asleep.
This is like the opposite. It's like pulling the envelope rather than pushing it.
Right.
It's like making it less offensive and less, punk rock or whatever.
Right.
That the kids nowadays be a cloud. Okay, Jim.
So I have one more movie. I watched a movie called Seder. I'm going to be honest. For the first 15 minutes of this movie, I thought it was going to be straight garbage. There is zero dialogue for 13 3/4 of a minute. It's just these two guys out in the woods, and that's it. But the movie itself is actually about a family that is being tortured by not tortured, but terrorized by a demon, and it's really well done. It turned out to be a really fantastic film. Mark, you would really enjoy it, I think.
Yeah, I've heard. I might have started it at some point. It's very familiar, the name.
You really have to push through the first 15 minutes.
I'm very ADHD now.
Yeah, you really got to push through. That's when it gets going, and you start learning about the mythology and why the demon only affects certain people in the family and all that kind of stuff. The only other thing I had to talk about was a series of books that I started, and I've already gone through the first 2 audiobooks, and it's called The Bleed. There's a total of 3 books. It's written by Mark Tufo, Chris Philbrook, and David Moody. It's a sci-fi / horror series. No.
Oh.
It is actually, The Bleed is a conglomeration of this ancient race, and half of them fled as their planet was dying, and the other half got left behind. The half that got left behind, they were very scientifically advanced, somehow created this organism that can go through the entire multiverse and just destroy civilizations. And half the book is basically the books are about these 10 people that are half, they call them gods, but half from this alien race and half human or some other species that are going to fight against it.
So those would be demigods, really.
Yes, they would, and they bring that term many times. But the thing that gets me about this is the humor in the book. Like, there's the character Maddie. She's hysterical. Like, I've found myself laughing out loud many, many times, but it doesn't detract from the overall story. I really am enjoying this more than I thought I would.
Very cool.
And that's it for me.
I'm going to run through a couple of things I've watched. I rewatched for the first time since probably the late 80s, Larry Cohen's God Told Me To. This is a movie around a detective who is investigating seemingly random individuals who are doing mass shootings or killings, and whenever he gets to them, he asks them, why are you doing this? And they say, well, God told me to. Mike, Jim, have you seen this one?
I've never heard of this one.
Same here. New on me, this.
Yep.
So this, I think, is probably my favorite Larry Cohen movie now that I've rewatched it. It starts off with, you think you know where it's going, but then it goes kind of nuts. And Mike, have you seen the King Cohen documentary?
I have, yes.
Yeah, so you know the gorilla.
Oh, right, okay, yeah.
So this one has and it was in that documentary too. It has like a St. Patrick's Day parade scene in New York, right? And in fact, Andy Kaufman, his first role, and he's in there. But you can tell that what they're doing, they didn't get the permits to do any of this stuff. It's like crazy. But this is Richard Lynch in it as well, and it just, from the initial premise to where it ends up, it's like totally different. And you're thinking one thing because you're thinking, well, maybe these are religious fanatics or something. Well, no, there's something else going on, and you're not going to guess what it is until it's revealed to you. So, absolutely great movie, and big recommend. The other one, Jim, I talked to you about, and talking about horror movies, like I don't get scared of horror movies. If I want to be scared, I'll watch the news or watch some documentaries or whatever. I mean, movies are just movies. I mean, they're not real life. However, I did watch a movie where I could not look at the screen for large portions of the movie. It was stomach churning.
And it was a PG-13 movie, you said?
It's a PG-13 movie.
Wow.
And it's a recent movie. And this goes down to personal fears. And this movie was Fall.
Yes.
Oh, okay. This is the one where they're up on the tower, right?
Right.
Okay.
And, I sometimes torture myself by watching, like, the YouTube videos of people doing similar things. Like, because I am terrified of heights. And
you'll see all those Instagram pictures of, like, mad bastards in Dubai.
Yeah. And this is an hour and a half. Well, probably, like, a good hour of it is them up on this 2,000-foot tower where the ladder is falling off.
Yeah, I probably would have had the same reaction because I'm afraid of it.
And the shots looking down, and they're trying to do things and jump, this little gap, and like it's kind of like open water because I have that fear too. And I love movies where people are stuck in one situation.
Did you ever see Frozen?
Yep, love Frozen. Buried with
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah. 127 Hours. Like, I love all those. Like, even if you look at, like, Cube, movies like that.
I love that movie.
But it's just people stuck in one location. They can't get out. But this one, they're stuck up in that top of that fucking tower, and the camera pans down. I'm like, oh my God, I can't even look at this. I'm going to throw up. I have an Oculus VR, and I bought a game called The Climb 2. And it's virtual reality. You're climbing up a skyscraper or whatever. I find even that, like, I don't even know why I bought that. Just to torture myself. There's certain parts where you have to, like, jump to a different ledge. And it's so, like, VRs can be very realistic. And it's just like, oh my God. Ooh. So anyway, yes, Fall. Apart from that, I watched the most recent episode of The Last of Us, which did have a bit more going on about it.
Yep.
And I like where it's going. And I think the Ellie character is getting more likable. Bella Ramsey plays her. And, yep, enjoying that.
Okay. Is that it for you, Mark?
That is it.
Okay.
Mike?
Well, Mike, I want to say thank you from Mark and, our other 3 listeners for you coming on and joining us today. We really appreciate it.
No, it's awesome. I don't get to talk horror very often, on Chinstroker Vs Punter because my co-host isn't the biggest horror fan. So yeah, it's been very therapeutic. I appreciate it.
Well, anytime you want to come on, you just let us know.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I will definitely do that.
Mike, do you want to plug your stuff, the Rewatch Project, your podcast?
Yeah. So 2 shows I do: Chinstroker Vs Punter, where we discuss mainly one film each fortnight. Paul's actually down with sickness at the moment, so there won't be one this week. And also the Rewatch Project, which is a podcast that I do with my wife, both out there on Apple Podcasts, YouTube as well. We have YouTube channels for both of those things. So go and check those out.
Awesome. Oh, by the way, Krull is the best movie ever made.
Oh, God.
Isn't it just?
It is.
And
it's perfect.
First film I watched when I bought a projector was Krull.
Oh, yeah. It is classic. Anyway, Mike, thanks so much for taking the couple hours. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
That I will.
The rest of our Saturday night.
Enjoy.